Thekas asks, when Bitcoin is under attack, some people just say, don't worry, Bitcoin is unstoppable. I see their point, but could this inaction be dangerous in the end? Yes, I would agree. But I think the answer, don't worry, Bitcoin is unstoppable, doesn't mean do nothing. What it means is, from a technical perspective, and given a social response, Bitcoin is very difficult to damage through the attacks that we're seeing right now. Right now, the vast majority of the attacks against Bitcoin are social attacks. There are attacks in the media, there are attacks with propaganda, there are attacks with tax legislation and accounting legislation and regulations in the banking system. They're not attacks against the actual protocol or the miners or anything like that. And from that perspective, in those types of attacks we're seeing right now, they're not really effective in the long run, because every time Bitcoin survives one of these attacks, it feeds the narrative of unstoppability, which makes it more appealing to people. So the point is that saying, don't worry, Bitcoin is unstoppable also serves a purpose. The narrative of unstoppability becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy when the attacks are ineffective. Now, if we saw directed attacks against mining or against the network protocol or attempts to ban it, then we would need to make technical changes. We would need to either make them if we're developers or adopt them if we're node operators in order to thwart these attacks. And there are plenty of technical changes that are possible to make Bitcoin more stealthy, to make the operation of nodes more stealthy, to protect Bitcoin against attacks, to further anonymize it, to increase its privacy, et cetera, et cetera. Part of the reason there's no desire to implement those things today is because the attacks aren't really having the intended effect. And when attacks are not having the intended effect, that means there's no reason to build a defense. That doesn't mean there are no defenses or that people are simply going to sit back complacently and not do anything. What can I say, Thekas, against this other than, as my answer, don't worry. Bitcoin is unstoppable, but that doesn't mean don't do anything if people try to stop it.
Bitcoin is internet money. It's a system of money that exists on the internet, was created on the internet, and it allows you to send and receive value the same way you can send and receive an email anywhere in the world, instantaneously, without intermediaries. And that's kind of what you see at first glance. Behind that, it's a whole platform. It is, as the title of the book says, the internet of money. It is a set of protocols that allow you to basically exchange value with other people. But you can do a lot more with it than just that. Most people will use it as a currency. It's basically money that you can transmit from your smartphone to somebody else's smartphone directly, just like cash, but electronic. And the thing about it that's unique is that it's not owned by any corporation, any bank, or any government, just like the web isn't owned by anyone, or email isn't owned by anyone. And there's lots of companies that can send and receive email. There's lots of companies that can set up websites. There's a lot of companies that can set up applications that use Bitcoin. It's really quite interesting what happens when you create a form of money that is truly global. We really don't have forms of money that are truly global. If you even with your very advanced banking system and your access to all of the technology that you have in the American banking system, if you try to send money to some countries, it's almost impossible to do. And I experience this every time I get paid in Bitcoin. I'll go into a conference in Europe, and I'll do one conference with a banking industry and one conference with the Bitcoin community. And the little Bitcoin conference is going to be free to attend. And I don't make any money, but they sometimes cover some of my expenses. And I'll send an invoice, and the banking industry conference will send me a wire transfer. It takes, on average, 4 weeks for me to get it, with several calls to find out where it went, what's going on, why did it get lost. And it takes me on average 15 minutes to get paid in Bitcoin, no matter which country I'm being paid in.
This is a cynic in me. Is this because when they take the money and they're transferring it, they're moving it around, and now it's sitting in banks. When banks have money, if they have your money, even if it's just for a few weeks, they have the opportunity to use that money to make more money. Are they doing that?
It certainly doesn't. It doesn't hurt to keep it a bit longer. They're doing it primarily because the system has a series of intermediaries, and each of those intermediaries represent a risk. If one of those intermediaries says, I have the money for Mr. Antonopoulos' wire, and you give that money to Antonopoulos, but the intermediary doesn't give it to you, you're out of money, right? So there's risk. With every intermediary you put in, there's risk, and that's called counterparty risk. Because of the way the banking system is, with perhaps 5, 6, 7 intermediaries in a single transfer, that creates a lot of cumulative risk, and they protect with that risk by slowing things down. And that risk doesn't exist in Bitcoin because it's from one party directly to another, no counterparties. That's one of the core principles. The funny thing, I had this conversation with my bank. It said I had done this conference in Germany, Frankfurt, at the headquarters of the Bundesbank. Now, for those of your viewers or listeners who don't know, the Bundesbank is the federal bank of Germany. And they probably consider the United States Federal Reserve to be a mediocre creditor compared to the Bundesbank. This is like the best credit rating on the planet, right? And I'm going to speak at a conference there, and they're paying me for my expenses. They send a wire transfer, and I call my bank, and after 4 weeks, they finally find it and tell me, we've received your bank wire transfer. We're going to hold it because of the risk profile. I'm like, I don't understand. Well, you haven't been paid by this particular payer before, so we're going to put a hold on it. I said, you do know this is the Bundesbank, right? You are holding, and they held it for 2 weeks. You are holding for 2 weeks because of the credit risk of the Federal Bank of Germany, the most creditworthy institution. I'm not trying to receive money from Somalia. You know, this isn't even something weird. And if even they can't pay me in the age of the internet instantaneously, there is something wrong with this banking system. And there is. Because I got paid for the Bitcoin conference I was doing in the same town instantaneously. How many of you have money in a bank? None of you have money in a bank. Do you store physical money in a safe deposit box? Maybe then you could say you have money in the bank. Oh, a few people say that. The rest of you have loaned your money to a bank. And for the privilege of loaning your money to the bank, you will be paid the amazing interest sum of 0.00001% per year. And your bank will take that money, turn around, and loan it to the people standing next to you for 24.99% APR. This is a client-server relationship because that money only exists as a form of debt in a ledger that you do not control, a ledger that is stored by a server, and you are simply a client. In fact, you have no control over that at all. You don't even have basic interfaces to that money unless that interface is mediated by the server. That's what a client-server architecture does. We have another term in distributed systems that describes a particular form of client-server architecture where the secondary party only has a copy, a weak copy that isn't really meaningful. We call that a master-slave architecture. And if you think of the previous iteration of money as a master-slave architecture, you have to ask an uncomfortable question. Who is the slave? Because in a system of debt, one of the two parties is always the slave. You are the client. You are not the server. And the server doesn't really serve you. They serve themselves because they are the master. And that is the architecture of money we live in. That is the architecture of money we use in our civilization. An architecture of money where you have no control. An architecture of money where every interaction is mediated by a third party that has absolute control over that money. For me, the most interesting thing is not what Bitcoin can do for Western developed countries, because we have fairly sophisticated banking systems. I am fascinated by the idea of being able to deploy Bitcoin on a Nokia feature phone in Kenya, in Lagos, Nigeria, and bringing online to a global economy people who have never had access to financial services with international credit, and who could now be connected to everyone else in the world on an equal footing. That is very exciting to me, and I think that's where the greatest need lies that Bitcoin can fulfill.
Okay.
When I've discovered it, I spent 4 months consuming as much as I could, except food. I lost 26 pounds on the highly inadvisable diet of obsession. These open, borderless, decentralized, censorship-resistant. And the reason it's so fascinating is because it isn't what it appears to be at first glance. Greece, Cyprus, Spain, Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, India, Turkey, Pakistan, the Ukraine. What do these countries have in common?
Nice people.
One day you wake up and you discover that the banks are closed. Who benefits in the end? The banks. They get bailed in. You'll be pleased to know that that CEO, as we speak, is facing jail time. No, of course he isn't. Come on. Where have you been? And before long, they will rewrite history. They will rewrite history to say that the reason the banks are failing and the reason the economy is on fire is because you provided an exit, is because Bitcoin exists. They will say that Bitcoin started the fire. We didn't start the fire. If money is speech, if money is a language, and you disconnect it from all other media, and you make it pure speech, pure content, an internet content type, a protocol designation, money over IP, it completely separates it from all of these previous notions of nations, sovereign issuers, institutions that control. Because Bitcoin is not going after replacing national currencies. Oh no. It's doing something far more dangerous. It's encouraging people to put their savings outside the system. Bitcoin introduces a platform on which you can run currency as an application on a network without any central points of control, a system completely decentralized like the internet itself. It is not money for the internet, but the internet of money. The Internet of Money was launched on January 3rd, 2009. Do not underestimate this.
When you hear wallet, what you think is a container that contains your money. And that actually will lead you down the wrong path, because in cryptocurrencies, wallets don't contain coins. Let me say that again. Wallets don't contain coins. Instead, wallets are systems that manage keys and transactions. So where are the coins? The coins are always on the blockchain, not in the wallet.
If you control the Bitcoin keys, it's your Bitcoin. If you don't control the Bitcoin keys, it's not your Bitcoin. You are back to a master-slave relationship with a bank.
Bitcoin represents a fundamental transformation of money, an invention that changes the oldest technology we have in civilization, that changes it radically and disruptively by changing the fundamental architecture into one where every participant is equal, where a transaction has no state or context other than obeying the consensus rules of the network that no one controls, where your money is yours and you control it absolutely through the application of digital signatures, and no one can censor it, no one can seize it, no one can freeze it, no one can tell you what to do or what not to do with your money. It is a system of money that is simultaneously absolutely transnational and borderless. And we've never had a system of money like that. If you control the Bitcoin keys, it's your Bitcoin. If you don't control the Bitcoin keys, it's not your Bitcoin.
I'm not sure who are Bitcoin's biggest detractors. I can tell you that I, along with every other passionate advocate I know, started off as a detractor. I think it's important to note that my initial response to first understanding or first identifying Bitcoin was, this is nerd money. It can't possibly work. In fact, when Satoshi Nakamoto invented Bitcoin and announced it on the crypto mailing list, everyone around him responded in pretty much the same way. The circle of advocates, which is now numbering in the millions, consists entirely of people who started out as very strong skeptics. The difference is, the first time I saw it, that was my reaction. The second time I read the paper and understood that this was not a currency, it was a decentralized network model for financial security and trust, which allows currency, but also allows many other things. And that literally blew my mind. And then I understood this was much bigger. So we all started out as skeptics. I don't know if all the skeptics become advocates over time, but I do see that most people who look at Bitcoin carefully very quickly understand that there's a lot more than meets the eye to this.
So what would be Bitcoin's biggest threat to growth? Would it be having people overcome fear of their unknowns? Would it be the security aspect, the level of technology available, or the individual nodes that might not have the security that the whole system has?
I think there are some very significant security problems related to the ownership and control of Bitcoin keys and Bitcoin wallets for the end user. The simple truth is that we've been doing information security for a handful of decades, and as an industry, that industry is not very effective at doing it, whether that's trying to protect credit card numbers or Bitcoin for the end user. The nice thing about Bitcoin is that that risk is compartmentalized so that there is no systemic risk. Over time, I think we're going to see the development of more secure mechanisms like hardware wallets, such as the ones that are beginning to appear in the market today. And so for every problem I see in Bitcoin, as an entrepreneur, I simultaneously see a tremendous opportunity. I think if you go back and look at the history of disruptive technologies like this, in 1994 there were dozens and dozens of articles about how the internet would fail because no one would be able to ever find anything on the internet. Sergey Brin and Larry Page decided that was an opportunity, not a problem. I think with Bitcoin, each one of these problems also is possibly a very innovative new financial industry that can offer solutions.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question, Chair, if I may. So, of the millions of users of Bitcoin currently, who would constitute the biggest user group? International financial transactions, or what? Like, who's the biggest user now, or the one with the highest plurality?
Well, honestly, I think there are a few statistical surveys that provide some insight into that. I'm not sure about the exact numbers. I think the most common use for Bitcoin is charitable giving, donations, and tipping. And I would say probably the demographic at the moment is very similar to the early internet, which is a very narrow demographic of technology professionals. There's a lot of nerds in this space. I can say that for sure. But it just follows the same path as any other technology. It's becoming more and more broadly appealing to a broader demographic over time. For me, the most interesting thing is not what Bitcoin can do for Western developed countries, because we have fairly sophisticated banking systems. I am fascinated by the idea of being able to deploy Bitcoin on a Nokia feature phone in Kenya, in Lagos, Nigeria, and bringing online to a global economy people who have never had access to financial services with international credit, and who could now be connected to everyone else in the world on an equal footing. That is very exciting to me, and I think that's where the greatest need lies that Bitcoin can fulfill.
Okay.